And what I can do is we can see. Hi, this is Cindy Oser, and I am here today with Dr. Megan Harper from Kent State University. Our subject today is Libraries Lending Hope. It's going to be an exciting experience about what we can learn as people who help our communities through libraries, through just any type of customer service. We are, before we get started, I want to remind you that if you would like to register for this event, please go to the library website and go to the events section. On the events page is a register online. This is great if you're wanting to get the library scholarship. It's kind of like an attendance roster. Or if you've had a professor ask you to go ahead and watch that, we can go ahead and send the information to the professor if they had requested it. I'm not going to sit here and talk all day. I am going to let our presenter start. She is the interim director of School of Information of Kent State University. She worked in K through 12 as a school librarian and administrator, so she comes from lots of experience. I hope you enjoy this event, and we'll talk a little bit at the end. Go ahead and take it away, Dr. Harper.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let me go to my share. For some reason, I can't see the share. It's still on you. Let me just go down. There, I got it. Okay. There we go. All right. Thank you, Cindy, for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be part of your seminar series. My topic is Libraries Lending Hope, Promoting Hope, Resiliency, and Wellness. I think it's always helpful to kind of set the stage for kind of my core beliefs and why I actually believe that libraries lend hope. And so I just like to start with three things I really believe, and that is the power of libraries to touch lives, the power of librarians to create positive change. I really believe that librarians have a lot of power, and as one individual, and I really believe that librarians and libraries can foster hope in their communities, whatever that library might be, whether it's an academic library, a school library, a public library. I really believe that libraries have a lot of power and do a lot for their communities and for the greater good. So, what I like to start out with actually is that is the power of hope and how libraries foster hope. There really is a science of hope, and how hope is especially important for people who might be struggling with adversity, because if they have, like, for example, if someone is in recovery, I heard this from a medical doctor who gave a presentation on recovery and addiction. And he said the single most important aspect of an individual going through recovery is actually the hope. Like, medical intervention helps, looking at a person holistically, because it just isn't their medical help, but how they feel socially, emotionally, spiritually. But key to that is they are in recovery because they have hope for a change in their life. And hope is very powerful. It isn't just powerful for those going through adversity or through those going through recovery, but hope inspires resiliency, the ability to go through difficult times, and therefore affects wellness. And when people have hope, resiliency, and wellness, they feel cared for. And there's a whole body of research and actually decades of research on the ethic of care and how important care is to helping people overcome adversity, helping people build resiliency. If people feel cared for, they're more resilient. If they feel cared for, they're more healthy. So I always like to start out with those key concepts because I think as we go through the presentation, I'll kind of talk a little bit about resiliency. And I really feel that librarians and libraries can help build community resiliency in their community. And I'll talk a little bit more about resiliency and how libraries can build resiliency. I'll talk a little bit about because it's only an hour presentation, so there's a lot to get through. But hopefully you'll be inspired and feel as librarians that you totally rock and you have so much power and you're so important to those people that you're interacting with on a daily basis. So I like to start with like trauma because there is a pervasive experience for most people have experienced trauma. And trauma is not just something that actually happens to someone. Again, here's the trauma defined, but it's also a perception of if someone feels threatened, if they've sometimes we have secondary trauma when people work with other people who have experienced trauma. They themselves then become traumatized. So it can be an actual negative event, and it can be a perceived threat. And it can be, as a result, trauma can be the effects of racism, poverty, and generational trauma. And I'll talk a little bit more about those things as well. So when I like to talk about a trauma informed service or trauma informed care, and really what that means is if you have a trauma informed approach to the service that you provide, it's really there's the 4 R's, which I like this image because it really is concise. You realize how widespread the impact of trauma is, you recognize the signs, and you respond by looking at all of your policies and procedures and your programming and as an overall structure, looking at the foundation of how you provide your responses to your community, and then also a commitment to resist re-traumatization. And I'll in this presentation, I give some suggestions for things that we can do as individuals to help resist that re-traumatization. So the effects of trauma are they can be very widespread as far as it affects all things such as your feelings, such as hopelessness. It can be one of the effects of ongoing trauma is that your body is always in sort of this flight or fight, and a couple of things just that trauma does trickle down to the next generation. And how it trickles down is that sometimes when parents have a feeling of hopelessness or fear or powerlessness, that will trickle down into how they interact with their children, and children can pick up on that trauma. And the one thing is to recognize that sometimes, even when someone who has experienced trauma, even when their life gets better, they still can suffer from anxiety and depression and other mental health challenges. So, because trauma actually affects they're even saying that trauma affects gene development, but it does affect your brain changes. It does affect your physical and mental health. So, and I just throw this out here. This was actually the poverty trauma connection. It's actually getting a little more attention now. When you look at the long term effects of poverty, um, childhood poverty is known as chronic stress or toxic stress, which leads to chronic trauma. And the socioeconomic issues that come along with poverty actually cause a lot of the childhood trauma, or what they call adverse childhood experiences. This is actually one of my first experience was in an inner city school system, and my school was it was situated on the edge of four gang territories, so there was significant crime. It was in what they call the worst police district, so it had the most violence, but it was also in the highest poverty. And that's actually what kind of got me started on looking at the ethic of care and trauma and the connection between poverty and trauma when I first began my career in education. So this is just a look at your brain on trauma. And if you look at the healthy brain and the front and the abused brain, you can see that there's significant gaps. And what this results in, that children who experience trauma, they might often have impulse control. Their emotional responses might be skewed. Something you'll hear the word that a child was triggered. Something that might be sort of not upsetting to a child who hasn't experienced trauma may be very traumatizing to another child and elicit an emotional response that seems very sort of over the top. Um, Many times they actually see when a child goes through trauma that their brain is changed and they actually lose IQ. Sometimes this results in children being unable to learn to read. They maybe have learned to read, but then they lose their ability due to the brain changes. They also, another thing that I think leads to depression and anxiety is many children who have experienced trauma, and this may even go on to adults, is that they feel that they can't relate to other people, that maybe they're the only person that has experienced this. And that's another kind of isolating, sort of perpetuating kind of thinking that goes along when someone experiences trauma. So libraries, I think when they do provide services and resources, but I think one thing, while we're not maybe, I always people always say, well, I'm not the medical professional. No, but people who are experiencing who have experienced trauma, and because it's so pervasive, they're your patrons, they're your community. I mean, people, you may not be able to see what, that's the thing with trauma, you can't always see it, it's not visible, but it's definitely shaping how they respond. It's definitely shaping their experience, their everyday life experience. And I just throw that family members, many struggle with family members who have an addiction, who may have suffered trauma, and family members can have a lot of different feelings. And I don't know that there's any probably community in our whole United States that hasn't been affected by the opiate crisis, by addiction, by poverty. I just don't know of any utopia that we have in the United States where no problems exist. So most likely, the people that you're serving in your community are definitely have experienced trauma, in some way, and they may be coping with other family members who have experienced trauma, who have experienced a substance abuse disorder. So it's something to keep in mind. The USA statistics are not real encouraging. They're really, we're not that different from the global, what the, what's looking like global statistics. But one of the things on this slide that I just want to talk about is the average delay between onset of symptoms and intervention is 8 to 10 years. So often children show, um, they may exhibit signs that they have been affected by trauma, but it's 8 to 10 years. So they're adults before they ever start getting some intervention. And whether that's someone who is a caring person who's taking a personal interest in them and helping them build their resiliency. That's why I think librarians are so important, and educators. um, the the research shows that if you have a child, and they feel that someone cares about them, they are 35 times more likely to be successful. And I think what I always point out is, okay, so they don't say you have to have a team of people that can make a difference. What they say is it takes one person taking an interest in a child, showing, being a mentor, that one person who can be instrumental in a person's life. And I really believe that can be librarians. And so the other really troubling statistic is that if you look at the suicide is on an is on an increase, and it has been increasing. It's not getting better. So, and I think what's most troubling is that suicide is it's moving down. So children as young as 9, 8, and 9 are sometimes attempting suicide, and it is the third leading cause of death for ages 10 to 14. And again, the just thinking about the link between adverse childhood experiences and suicide. It's like they're 3,000 times more likely to attempt suicide if they've experienced an adverse childhood experience, which is some kind of trauma. Um, this this was something, I I thought about this. I was actually at a court, and I was watching the people being brought in, and they were meeting with the judge, and they were all from jail. And I said to the person next to me, who's actually a domestic violence advocate, I said, "How many of those people do you think had childhood trauma?" And she said, "Oh, about 100%." She said, if you talk to most people, that's why they call it the school to jail sort of uh, chain, is because, or pathway, because many children who have experienced trauma end up incarcerated later on. So there's also that strong link between childhood trauma and addiction. And I might also add, there's a lot of research now that they're putting out about how childhood trauma also, adults who have experienced childhood trauma have a significant increase in cardiovascular disease and heart disease. So um, this just really struck me, and I think um, we really have to think about, you know people who are troubled and need our help, and maybe instead of asking, why are you acting this way, it's more like, what has happened to you to make you act this way. I think it's a shift in how, in sort of looking at a child, and their behavior. So our USA statistics, again, we have one of the things, our serious mental illness is, of course, on the rise. We look at um, the 1 in 5 adults are experiencing mental illness in a year. And that's probably increased actually with the pandemic, because the latest statistics I've seen is there's significant increase in anxiety, and people seeking medication for anxiety, sleeplessness, just trying to cope with stress. While as when I've looked at some of the recent reports, that medical professionals are saying it's more difficult to provide that care, mental health care, to people because of the pandemic, reaching people. The telehealth isn't always as effective as the meetings that they had in person. And also just um, statistically looking at the amount of reported domestic violence as well as child abuse, while the reports are going down, the admittance to hospitalization of children and adults is actually in serious with serious domestic violence has actually gone up. So it's something we need to, I think, be aware of. Um, I have this slide. This again just gives some statistics, but again, suicide is again the third leading cause of death in older adolescents globally. And it's also, if you look at the World Health Organization in their 2020 report that they published about a year ago, they said that mental health conditions are a serious concern across the globe. So I've referred to the adverse childhood experience. This is known as the ACE or the ACEs. You'll see, actually, you can even look up ACEs on Google and it'll bring you back lots of helpful articles and things about adverse childhood experiences. But the significance of this study is just that um, having more adverse childhood experience is associated with a 700% increase in alcoholism, or 3,000% increase in attempted suicide. So the more trauma you have, the more damaging it is to you as an adult. So some common types of childhood trauma, again, this a lot of these things can be things that maybe the child doesn't experience, like it's not a physical thing. Sometimes it is physical abuse or neglect, but it also is viewing violence, family violence, being separated from a parent. I mean, those kinds of things are, we might not think of those things as being particularly traumatic, but they definitely are. And as the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk for all of these things. And I think if we go back to looking at the changes in the brain and the emotional, I mentioned the skewed emotional response, the inability to cognitively also process effectively, may lead to it's just sort of like an effect where someone makes one bad decision and that bad decision leads to other bad decisions, and it just ends up being a very negative sort of mapping to and pathway to adulthood. I've done a lot of research actually on the opiate crisis, and it's interesting because I really feel that libraries have kind of been on the front lines of the opioid crisis. And uh, one of the studies I did was actually looking at the perceptions of how libraries were responding to their communities, um, to the opioid crisis in their communities. And it's interesting because many of the school librarians talked openly about the just dealing with children who were getting off the bus and finding parents deceased, overdosed, parents being incarcerated. They were really dealing with, kind of the front lines of children being very traumatized by this. And an interesting article that came out was sort of linking at where there were high rates of opioid overdoses, and then how that affected that those same communities were also seeing increased number of children who attempted suicide or committed suicide. So opioid use, I mean, it's sometimes they say the difficulty is it's difficult to see if opioid use was a suicide attempt or if death has just been a result of opioid use. But it does say that, what they see is that people who have opioid use have a 75% increased likelihood of a suicide attempt. So there's definitely a connection between substance abuse and suicide and trauma, and I think we just need to be aware of that. I think we as librarians can do a lot in suicide prevention, whether that's, just making people aware of the resources that are out there, also helping, providing programming that helps build resiliency and helps make connections so that people are building their social emotional wellness, which will also help, because again, connectedness, that people will feel by being a part of library programs, meeting other people, having youth connectedness, connecting people in the library to other resources that they can use in the community. Something that I like most of the time we think about, I think caring is kind of a soft and squishy kind of iffy thing, but I think I really liked this quote, because it really addresses that caring is really meeting an individual, and by demonstrating care, we are helping individuals develop their wellness, their resiliency, creating caring and hope. And when I look at the ethic of care, I say, caring has to be intentional and foundational. So when we look at our policies, when we look at our procedures and our day to day management, are we really representing that ethic of care? Are we making our policies and procedures outweigh what is kind of best for people? And I always, one of the one of the people who's just done researchers and educators who's done like boatloads of research, actually decades of research on the ethic of care is Nell Noddings. And she said oftentimes the most caring institutions are education and healthcare. People don't feel very cared for in those institutions. So they're designed on the premise of caring, but they engage in non-caring practices. And I often think, like with librarians, like when I have library managers or administrators, this is they sometimes I'll get the question, well, I have to run the library. I can't just let everybody do what they want. Well, doing what they want is not that's not the best. That's not how you demonstrate caring either. You can have, I always say you can have difficult conversations. And I'm an administrator now, and I've been an administrator before. And if someone is not performing well, you can have those difficult conversations when you have an ethic of care. You can make decisions about programming, and you can make decisions about policies that are based on an ethic of care, but still enable you to effectively run your services. And some of what I think you can do is also look at look at assessment. So many times I think we don't really gather the data that we need, and I always say, we don't do a lot of assessment. We might change a policy based on, one bad encounter or one experience, when in reality we might need to do a little research and gather more data so we can make an informed decision. So I always say the 3 C's of trauma-informed libraries is really to communicate, connect, and collaborate. And when we are communicating, that might be communicating with community partners, communicating with our patrons, um, and connecting people not just with our resources that we often have a lot of, but connecting our community, our library community, with community partners that are people that they might not know are out there that can help them, and collaborating with community partners. I often think that sometimes the library is the best kept secret. They have so many resources, they have so much information about their communities, and they could really be a wonderful source of information to other community partners about the community. So, why do libraries should be their community connectors? First of all, they're free. Everybody's welcome. They are information rich, and they're known as non-judgmental. And one of the things that I think libraries don't realize their power is that actually research demonstrates and surveys show that libraries are the most trusted institution in the community. People will go to their library because they consider it sort of like a neutral zone, a safe place. And they're generally viewed by other community partners as helpful, in that they serve the greater good. So they're not politically, they're politically neutral. They're seen as just a good, um, trusted institution. And libraries really need to take advantage of that they have such a place. I mean, there's not too many institutions, I think, in our community that are viewed that way. Even community partners that are seen to be, they might be community partners that are socially, that are supposed to help with social services and so on. They're not always viewed positively, whereas the library is. So if we get into the we're looking at resiliency, and I like to just define it a little bit and talk a little bit about it. So we have the definition on the screen, but we also, one of the things about resiliency is the perception of a person and how they view something that has happened. So sometimes when you have the same event and you have two people who have experienced that event, they view it very differently. So, one, I think that perception and how people think about things is actually one of the most important things, and so that's why resiliency can be taught, because we can teach people how to keep perspective, how how to think about alternatives, how to have hope. And so really resiliency is something that can be developed. And so how can libraries foster resiliency? So you can illuminate your connections. This might be shared events with community partners. You could do collaborative initiatives with other community partners. And I often say that sometimes the library can be the connector, but they don't have to be the sustainer. They don't have to be the maintainer. So perhaps you want to connect with all of maybe the wellness and groups that you have in your community. You could have a library program and introduce your library community to those support groups, to those. You don't have to maintain the connection. You're just doing everyone, you're doing the connector part. You're saying, come here to this neutral place, see what our community has to offer, and then leave it up to the individuals to connect and pursue maybe further help. You can highlight your community library resources and the community professionals, and then work with your community professionals. Say you want to increase your mindfulness offerings and the resources that you have. Maybe you want to increase your the number of materials that you have on substance abuse disorders. Perhaps you want to create a display. Work with your community professionals to come up with vetted resources that you can then share with your community. And again, provide opportunities for your library personnel. One of the things I think that is so important in libraries is that we create these compassionate workplaces that help build the resiliency of our librarians, because they are on the front lines, they are providing services. And so as much as possible, we need to be helping our colleagues, our workplace colleagues, to help build their own self-care, to help foster their own resiliency. So one of the things I think with this, this is like a quiz, and there's a lot of free quizzes out there. But this is the one I like the most, because I think it helps people identify some of their real strengths and positives that they can offer to someone else. So you can, and so then the second one is looking at, if you look at these resiliency sort of characteristics, so we have caring and support, high expectations for success, opportunities for meaningful participation. So I'll take number 2, the high expectations for success. So if you were doing this resiliency quiz, you could say, yes, I have several people in my life who let me know they believe in my ability to succeed. Or I get the message you can succeed at my work or school. So if you look at yourself that you have those things, those are some things that you can provide in your workplace. You can help a colleague get the message that they succeed. You can let others know that you believe in their ability to succeed. And if you're a parent, this is you can let your children know. One of the things that I always try to do with my children is I try to say to them, I have confidence in you. You got this. And when they get frustrated sometimes, I try to say, well, let's think about a solution. You come up with a solution. I know you got this. Let's Let me know how I can help you. Or I'll say if they make a mistake, sometimes we do do-overs. So, and again, I try to provide the opportunity for them to create that I try to send the message that they can succeed, and that they can develop, that a positive bond, say with their sibling, is it's valued, it's important. And so that's why we do do-overs, because it's important to me that my children have positive bonds with one another. So, so we can look at that as parents, but we can also look at that if we're a manager, and or we're a sibling, and we want to share with our siblings that, yes, I believe in you. Yes, I I believe in your ability, and in that you can overcome. You can't. I mean, one of the things I think is important to let people know, that you have confidence that if they do encounter a difficult situation, that they can overcome it. And I think that's important when you're looking at developing library policies, developing library procedures. It's always a good idea to involve your employees, so that when you do develop a solution or a process for how you might deal with a difficult situation or a difficult patron, that everybody feels confident in their ability to succeed at it. And this is something I think many people think that resilience is born, but actually we can help others. And so there's this slide right here talks about the resiliency in the workplace, and how we can help others deal with demanding, whether it's a demanding workload. We might have suggestions. We might brainstorm with with people on how they can be more resilient, how they can overcome uh, difficult situations. And sometimes I think this is also different things that we can do for our employees, such as, having a decompression room where where workers can go and take a break, and have a mindfulness corner where your employees can take that mindful break and role model, especially if you're an adult, and you're working with kids, or you're the manager, or the administrator. These are all things that we can role model, and we can share our process for handling difficult situations. So here are some specific ways to build resilience at work. Um, Again, I think these are all good things that we can do, and we can make this more of a library. So we have, like, in our school, sometimes we'll have a gratitude chart, and people will write what they feel, what they're grateful for, or we try to celebrate the success of faculty and staff. Um, and that is really, I think that's really important, because so much, I think, of what we see sometimes is negative, that sometimes we actually have to make a concerted effort to build up the positive. So one of the things too, I think libraries, I often, as I said, I think they're one of the best kept secrets. And as community leaders, I think sometimes libraries have to invite themselves to the table, because we are the information gurus, and we do have a lot of information that we can share with our community partners. And we can do outreach. And it's important that we outreach not just to the people who come into the library, but the people who are missing from the table. We can outreach to government, community partners, our city officials. Let people know what resources we have. This is something I've always said about my local library. I always think they have the most wonderful resources, and sometimes their own community partners don't realize, what a wealth of information they have to share, or the expertise, so to speak. For example, one time I went as a parent, I went to an internet safety presentation by my local sheriff's department. And it was interesting because they talked about, they gave us a lot of information about keeping our children safe on the internet, avoiding predators, but they never mentioned the library had, like, a ton of resources, like videos that you could watch with your child, um, books on it, books that you could read with your child, books that parents could read, um, just like a whole lot of resources. And so one of the things I did was I made, like, a little pathfinder, a little handout, and gave it to the the detective who was running the internet safety program, and was like, did you know that, you can recommend all these, that if parents want more information, they can go to the local library, and they have all this information and resources to access. I said, and one of the things that came up was that a lot of the parents don't have the technical skills that they really need. They don't have the technology skills. Well, the library offers free classes. And I had listed some of the classes, and he was like, wow, I never thought of the library as a partner, and as a community partner in this effort. And I said, well, you should have a librarian come and talk about the resources they have in their internet classes, their technology classes. And so I think it's just like there's some missed opportunities, and sometimes we make a flyer available, but I think sometimes we have to invite ourselves to the table. We have to do a more specific outreach. So programming, we just want to make sure that we're looking at our community needs assessment, that when we evaluate programs, we're just not asking if people are happy with it, that we're asking, what they learned from it. Will they be able to do more with what our programming, like will they act on it in the future? Um, Also, look at who's missing from the room so that we can look at the community that might not being served by the library, and look at sponsoring what I call care-based events, initiatives that build community within the community and build and lead dialogue to identify gaps in addressing community issues. So, for example, one of the events that one of my students created, and it actually was based on an information literacy class that I'm teaching, she created a module for senior citizens who were taking care of grandchildren because she said it was a significant population in her library because they didn't know how to access the library online databases to help their children, their grandchildren, or the children they were caring for. They didn't know how to help them with homework. And so one of the things she felt that the senior citizens who were caring for, providing kinship care to grandchildren needed more information literacy about the resources that they offered, the online resources that they offered in the library. Thinking about your facility space, again, looking at, if you haven't heard of universal design principles, basically you're looking at creating a facility that doesn't have any barriers, and universal design means that it's good for everybody. And basically, I think if there's one takeaway from this presentation is that anything that you do in any of these areas, whether you look at your programming, whether you look at the way you have staff policies and procedures, are you facilitating self-care with your employees? Any one takeaway is that these are good for everyone. You're not looking at someone who's been affected by trauma. All of the things that you do when you are demonstrating care, when you are in kind of implementing processes that help someone not be re-traumatized, where you're using trauma sensitive communication, any of those things are good for everybody. So again, you want to look at evaluate your space from multiple perspectives. And I always say there's lots of inventories online that you can look at. Do you have a flexible space? Is it versatile? Can you have lots of different types of activities? And looking at your facility as more than just a meeting space, looking at it as a place where people can come and feel safe and can increase their well-being, whether that's with a quiet corner, a mindfulness corner, um, um, activities that such as helping people relax, helping people connect. Or maybe it's with a community jigsaw puzzle. And also, and you might just have stress reduction opportunities provided in the library, and that might be a corner. It might be things that you want people to try, such as some people actually have little mindfulness kits that they check out. Thinking about collaborations, again, looking at outreach to community partners. And one of the things I think is really important is creating the opportunities for dialogue and these connections with community partners, initiating, being the leader. Don't wait to be asked. Again, becoming aware of the demographics of your community and all the issues, not just the ones who visit the library. And determine priorities on how you spend your time, your energy, and what services. And then I always say beware of the missed opportunities. Extend the services you already have. Take another look. Can you make more of a difference by involving another partner? And I just want to add the benefits of reading, because I throw this out as I have the bottom bullet point is popular recommendation by mental health therapists. There's actually statistics that say 85% of mental health therapists recommend some type of reading for people who are having, mental health issues. So it is a popular form of therapy. Um, and it can be very transformative. And I think that goes back to it. We always say, well, libraries aren't just books, and they're not, but they can be a significant um, part of helping people overcome trauma, helping people be more resilient. Again, here are some ideas for improving accessibility to resources. Um, you know, I always say, do your role model searching. Let people know that you have these resource databases, bundling library and community resources, um, using subject headings in your catalog. I teach cataloging, so I'm always big on making your catalog your number one marketing tool by making it very user friendly. Another thing, just for librarians, I always say, that interpersonal communication is so important. And that's where you really make a difference, that, the kindness that you demonstrate. And definitely thinking about your trauma sensitive language. I have a presentation I do called Words Matter, and it really looks at the communication and the words we use. And if I could just take, kind of the main premise of Words Matter is that, words have the power to really harm, but they also have the power to uplift, to give hope. And contrary to, what people say is sticks and stones may break my bones, but the names will never hurt me. No, they do. And words definitely do matter. And how we interact with people on a daily basis um, does reduce traumatization and does create this environment of safety. So this is just a short trauma sensitive. When you look at people first, that's typically sort of the premise of trauma sensitive communication. Is we look at individuals with a substance abuse disorder rather than addict. And one of the things I also think that we need to be aware of is that, especially if we're using words with children about, like, if we're saying, oh, your family member is a drunk. That family member is still their family member, and and that might imply judgment. And so as much, the other kind of aspect of trauma sensitive communication is that they're people first with a substance abuse disorder. They aren't that substance abuse. They aren't an alcoholic. They're someone with a substance abuse disorder, which there's someone experiencing homelessness, so that it's not a permanent designation. This is extending the idea that people do recover, that people can overcome situations. And again, just looking at the stigma of recovery. And I just want to show this because I think that we don't always talk openly and really address that this is sometimes an issue. Maybe people think that this is a difficult topic, but I also think, again, there's a way of, providing, just making people aware of the resources that you have to help other people who may be suffering from a substance abuse disorder. And again, when the medical, that was so profound, when that medical doctor said in his presentation, medical diagnosis and medical intervention really helps with recovery, but what's most important is that people have hope. And I think that we can do a lot to increase people's feelings of hope. Some barriers too is just, I have some suggestions here that maybe there's a lack of knowledge and understanding, a lack of clear priorities, contradictory messages, and again, that some ways that we can be proactive. Probably the number one is making information available to our community, to our employees, to our librarians, and creating these opportunities for library personnel to connect one another and build their own internal support networks. And I'll kind of leave you with this. For adults, caring is the first act in initiating healing. What a person thinks will make them better often does. And um, and I also think we talk about the domino effect of kindness. That's pretty real. So when we give hope to someone else, they in turn can then provide hope. So hope, it says, sometimes trauma survivors must rely on borrowed hope, hope that others hold out for them. And sometimes people who are going through adversity, they can't envision an alternative, and so it's very important that we provide that hope to others. And so that's it. I will stop sharing. Okay. Oh, I can't hear you.
Thank you very much. Lee, did you have anybody have any comment?
No, not at this time.
I do have a question. I have a couple of questions. Um, I've worked in both public libraries and academic libraries, and I know librarians, all types of librarians, have come across this. Um, we have people who are they're upset, they're angry, they're complaining. A lot of times when I've done active listening, I've found out that that's not really the problem. So, do you have any suggestions on how we can be more empathic? I know that your words matter. You mentioned that. Um, do you have like any information on how we can turn that, whatever that is, screaming, yelling at us, to helping them?
Well, two techniques that I've seen, like, that are recommended, and that actually I've tried. One is when you have a screaming person, to acknowledge their frustration. Sometimes they're not listening though, and so sometimes you have to repeat yourself. Like, keep repeating until they kind of calm down, because sometimes they just need to say it. And the other thing is what I always tell my librarian students, because I have graduate students in library school, and I say to them, everything is a yes, even if it's a no. So somebody might want something and that's against your policy, but you have something else you can do. You can always provide a yes answer, even if it's a no. You can say, this is what I can do for you. I'm not able to do that because that is, we have to, maintain privacy or whatever. But you can always say, yes, this is what I can do for you, even if it's really a no.
Right. Right. Well,
So
and
that's
another thing. Go ahead. And another thing is I've been reading, your tips, your suggestions for how to connect with your patrons in all forms. And we are all human. We all come from different backgrounds. A lot of times I've worked with teenagers, um, you know, or people who may not be living in a home right now. Just different things. In order to be empathic, um, do you have any suggestions on how to walk in someone's shoes, even if you've either had a past negative experience with them or with another person that reminds them of them? How do you get around being the best librarian for everyone equally?
Well, I think one of the things you have to do is really it's change your thinking, I guess, about a situation, because so many times people are hurtful when they're angry, when they act out, and that was, I don't know if you remember early on in the presentation, I said we have to ask the question, not why are you doing that, but what has happened to you
Mhm.
that cause it, because that removes it from being a personal attack. it's because most of the time, um, people are acting the way they're acting not because of you, even though you might be on the receiving end of it. And I think you have to just extend grace. And then the other thing is sometimes you have to extend grace to yourself and say, you know what, I can't really, that's why you should have like, that's why you should have colleagues that you can depend on. Because if it's more than you can take, then you might say, let me go get my supervisor. I think they'll be able to help you. Or, um, you have to be a team, but you also have to have that trust and build that trust. And I think that one of the things that library managers can do or supervisors can do is help people see what it looks like. So don't just say, well, be calm. No, what are the words that you say? What are the words that you say? What does it look like? Here's a scenario. Act it out. This is what you can say in this case. This is appropriate. It's very much on the training and knowledge and understanding. And also because sometimes people will act in odd ways that you think are odd, but you might not have thought that, this might be a characteristic of someone who's suffering from a particular thing. And so also that's again, um, uh, more knowledge and information, like someone who is experiencing a substance abuse disorder and it might be alcoholism. These are some things that they might exhibit. Here's a good way to handle this situation if someone is intoxicated when they come into the library. All that preparation is, I mean, the time that it takes to prepare people to deal with difficult situations, yes, it's time, but on the back end, it's in the long run, it makes for you're preserving the health and well-being of your employees, but you're also ensuring the health, you're trying to help the person who is being affected, by some adversity that they're acting out, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I do have a question. Your PowerPoint was packed with information. Is Do you mind sharing your PowerPoint? And if so, we have a way that we can go ahead and get that information to anyone who asks. And also, it sounds like your Words Matter PowerPoint has some amazing information. Um, you know, that way we are going to be posting this video on our the CTC's YouTube and the library's YouTube. But like your assessment in the middle and all that would be really helpful. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
Okay. And then if anyone wants a copy, just we put it in the comments. You can put email reference request at ctc.edu. Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Okay.
Before we go, first of all, thank you for an amazing presentation. So much information to process. Um, we uh, we actually have upcoming some of the things that you've talked about.
Oh, good.
We have in this month we have Workforce Solutions is partnering with us on communication and soft skills and getting a job, starting a job, and keeping a job. So make sure you sign up for that. Tomorrow we have a coronavirus live event. It is at a different time than our usual events. This one is at 4:40 p.m. rather than noon. So make sure that you get that one. It's with our CTC, Dr. Richard Kopek. We're in the process. Oh, and in November, we have just added 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. The Alzheimer's Association is partnering with us. So when you go home for holidays or you're with family for holidays, you'll have some, if you always worried about something, you'll have some information on that. We're already adding Qigong, anything and everything to try to keep everybody engaged. It is perfectly fine if you email us and ask us for, some type of a partnership. We're for it because the wonderful part about virtual is we have Dr. Megan Harper from Kent University right here in our living room. So we truly appreciate that. We want to thank you, and everyone, we hope you have an amazingly great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lee.